Welcome to the beat. I'm Ari Melber. Later this hour, we have the latest reporting on the horrific flooding tragedy in Texas. Just a terrible scene down there. We have the latest numbers. There's also new tariff threats from President Trump that are upsetting the markets, stoking talk of inflation. By the end of the hour, we will hear from the great author Ta-Nehisi Coates, as we always try to go deeper and broaden out over the course of our news program. We begin tonight with Donald Trump abusing executive power, some of it blatantly admitting it, other times doing it in ways that take critical scrutiny, reporting, investigative journalism to pull apart and make sense of what's happening. And some of these are stories that have echoes, they have a mood of repetition, but that's part of the problem. Not a government doing something once and getting dialed back or making a mistake, but rather what has accrued into a pattern. And while any serious journalist, all the journalists we studied under over the years say that you don't try to make journalism the story, you don't try to make the act of reporting the story. When the government cracks down on it, as we've seen in many countries, from Russia to Hungary, well, you don't ignore it either. Journalists and First Amendment experts, advocates across the political spectrum, to the extent that lawyers have the spectrum, and journalists, many of whom are completely nonpartisan in their careers, are united right now, starting this week, with concern, criticism, and some outright sounding serious alarms about it happening here. That what Trump once mused about or only tweeted about in the first term is now part of our lived reality in the autocratic crackdown against free speech, the free speech of journalists to report, unfettered both by government interference and by something that also can amount to censorship, government pressure on other entities, including the capitalist corporate structure, to constrain, censor, or change the journalism that the public uses and needs to govern itself. I am talking, of course, about this highly unusual and costly settlement where money is basically going from the CBS company, its parent company Paramount, towards Donald Trump and his interests. Paramount is now paying $16 million towards basically places that Trump wants, in this case, the presidential library, not directly into his pocket, but also reimbursing him and his organization's campaign, etc., for any legal fees accrued in their choice to sue 60 Minutes for something that is in the strike zone of journalism. Its efforts to report on the presidential campaign and to interview and quote both sides, which CBS, like many other outlets, endeavors to do every campaign year. They're also going to release the transcripts of their interviews with presidential candidates in the future. Not a big part of the settlement there, but Donald Trump made a claim that has not been proven in court. He never won this case outright, and it was considered far-fetched by First Amendment advocates, lawyers, experts. He basically said that the way the Kamala Harris interview aired was an affront, damage to him to such a degree that he wanted to take them to court. Legal scholars saw no case there. And if you want background, CBS has been sued by all sorts of important people before. They usually fight these cases, especially when the claim is weak. But the other thing going on is that its parent company, I should say, a bit of a tongue twister, its parent company, Paramount, has a lot on the line. Because right now they need the Trump administration's approval for what they want to do that matters a lot more to them, apparently, than some news interviews, for a big multi-billion-dollar merger. And that was now seen by Trump as a kind of prerequisite for getting the approval. The pressure intensified because Trump threatened Paramount with another defamation lawsuit on a different 60 Minutes report. In this settlement, he will also stand down on that particular threat. Although keep in mind, as we've seen in other countries, if the government can do this kind of thing and be rewarded for it, get away with it, what's to stop Trump from picking another current or future CBS report that he threatens to sue over? It's not as if CBS or any honest news organization can just stop covering the president of the United States. Now, journalists far and wide are condemning this development. I say it may have echoes because Trump has sued multiple press outlets. Others have settled in other scenarios. And this one had been leaking out. We reported on some aspects of this, for example, last week. But take the icon of CBS News, longtime CBS Evening News anchor Dan Rather, who says this today is a sad day for journalism, a distortion by the president, kneeling down and saying, yes, sir, by the billionaire corporate owners. He's speaking of the people who now run CBS, where he worked for so long. And he goes on to say, as you see here, quote, it was a sellout to extortion by the president. Current CBS journalists also condemn what's happening in their workplace.
The Paramount settlement poses a new obstacle. Can you hold power to account after paying it millions? Can an audience trust you when it thinks you've traded away that trust? The audience will decide that. Our job is to show up, to honor what we witness on behalf of the people we witness it for.
Trump finding new ways to basically not violate the actual First Amendment. For example, you're not seeing the government here passing a law to say you can't run the interview with his opponent that he didn't like. But he is, according to many, undercutting the spirit, the tradition, and quite possibly other laws, depending on if you believe the critics who, as I'll report, say this was a shakedown. There are also letters now to tech companies where his attorney general says they can go ahead and just violate the statute that does bar companies from working here on TikTok because Trump says so. Legal experts say it's a power grab. Presidents, of course, have some discretion about enforcement priorities, but they have never admitted to or been allowed to simply pick laws out that they don't want to follow. There is also the wider effort to undercut the courts to test how far they can go in defying or delaying or not really following court orders. And amazingly, the Supreme Court recently has helped the executive. They didn't do that during the Biden era, but now that Trump has been in charge here in office for over 100 days, the Supreme Court agreed with Trump's request to have other judges back off pausing or freezing even executive actions that are deemed likely illegal, that were likely to later be frozen or overturned by the high court. An ABC News report says the court's ruling this term disproportionately advantaged Trump, which makes it easier for these assorted abuses of power, some allegedly illegal, if you believe that it's extortion, if there is evidence of that, some skirting the law, and some technically lawful, but against all long-term bipartisan traditions, including conservative traditions, about why you don't want the government in charge of the press or the tech companies or the free markets telling you what you're going to learn, what you're allowed to read or see on TV or the internet, what may be happening in the world. There is a reason why across the world autocrats have always gone after the press early in efforts to ultimately curtail democracy itself. With these alerts in mind, I want to bring in the Atlantic staff writer Mark Leibowich and Democratic political strategist Juanita Tolliver. Welcome to both of you. Mark, the CBS story has been going for a while. It's now hit this crescendo. And I haven't heard anyone involved in journalism or facts defend it, say it's on the level. There seems to be agreement in the factual community that this was an ugly, sordid deal, even if, as I carefully point out, it may not be itself a crime.
Well, you're not going to find any defense from me. I think everyone in this business, certainly on the news side of the operation, finds it quite chilling, not just for this case in particular, but what it bodes for the future as far as what Donald Trump is willing to do to basically harass news organizations. But I think even more so, what the parent companies of news organizations are willing to cave into. I mean, I think to be honest, there's always going to be some tension between the corporate parents of journalism. Journalists are going to push in one way. I think a more corporate interest will maybe push in the other direction, but that's sort of part of the journalism that we operate in. This is something that basically the parent company of CBS here, Paramount, and just in advance of this merger, is looking to sort of usurp the journalistic interest of CBS, specifically 60 Minutes, and try to just sort of muddy the waters and make it harder for their journalists to do journalism going forward. I can't think of a worse result. I certainly associate myself with Dan Rather and every other journalist who condemns this.
Juanita?
I keep going back to a statement that Bill Owens, the outgoing longtime executive producer of 60 Minutes, made back in April when he resigned, emphasizing how 60 Minutes lost independence through their parent company, through these threats from Donald Trump. And it just highlights the impact, because Ari, you're right. Technically, Donald Trump has not violated the First Amendment. However, it is going to have an impact on editorial decisions, stories chosen, how they're delivered to audiences, and not just by CBS. I think back to the settlement that ABC made with Donald Trump in their lawsuit. And so it just comes back to this reality of taking yet another step towards this type of control, because Donald Trump is now in a positive momentum building posture in terms of threats. What threats are going to come next? What cooling effect will we witness? How will stories be told going forward? These are all questions that hopefully journalists continue to stand up and maintain the journalistic integrity and ethics associated with the work, because the audience is the public, not the president.
Yeah, and you remember you're referencing, and people may remember that moment with Mr. Owens, who was the journalist and the executive producer in charge of 60 Minutes. Whatever they saw writing on the wall, whatever pressures were brought to bear, they were dealing with it first before we got to today's settlement, which
Exactly.
led to something. Yeah, which led to something very dramatic. You referenced it. I want to play when Scott Pelley, who's a sort of a measured, constrained, nonpartisan figure on the old guard of nightly news as there ever is, said, enough, basta, and spoke out for the aforementioned Mr. Owens. Let's take a look back at that moment on 60 Minutes.
Our parent company, Paramount, is trying to complete a merger. The Trump administration must approve it. Paramount began to supervise our content in new ways. None of our stories has been blocked, but Bill felt he lost the independence that honest journalism requires.
Mark?
I mean, look, what I find really upsetting here, frankly, is, Donald Trump is going to do what Donald Trump does. I mean, everything he's done here is basically in the zone of the way he behaves around journalists, around journalism in general. What we rely on as journalists is for our parent companies, our editors, to back us, to have our backs. I mean, we want to work for companies that fight for this principle, fight for our independence, fight for the stories we want to write. And that's what didn't happen here. So, it'd be nice if Donald Trump showed a little bit more deference to the traditions and the norms and the independence of journalists in general. But I'm much more upset about Paramount here, and I know why they did it. It's obviously a corporate interest of theirs, but you don't have to like it, and I can't imagine what it's like to work for CBS under these circumstances, and I hope I never have to.
Yeah, straight up. I want to bring in another topic that relates to, again, on these downstream effects from this administration. Some things will take a lot longer. And if we're fair in journalism, we've just been talking about journalism, we tell people, here's the risk, or here's why this policy is criticized. But it could be years before you see how the big new bill kicks off how many people on health care. And we'll track the numbers. Other indicators are coming in fast. I want to show something really striking that's part of our first block of the hour top story, because measles in the U.S. is now hit already a 33-year high, 1,200 confirmed cases. This is now across most states in the country. There have been over 150 hospitalizations. Measles was all but officially eliminated in 2000, according to prior CDC accounts of what was a very simple, workable solution: the effective vaccines. Now, as this disease surges, amidst, of course, the post-COVID vaccine skepticism in the country, the HHS secretary chosen by Donald Trump, RFK Jr., is saying this.
If I walk down the street, I have every block, I have moms coming up and saying thank you. There's been this deliberate information chaos. So we're going to change all that, and we're going to make it so that people can do studies, that they can do gold standard science.
Juanita, it seems clear this is the result of what became a very kind of broad-ranging vaccine debate about the COVID vaccine that spread skepticism against other long-running vaccines. One of the things we first heard about COVID was, hey, it's new, how does this work? That's not the case with measles. And RFK appears to think this is not a problem. Your thoughts?
I mean, it's really hard to believe anything he's saying. One, about strangers coming to thank him for these policies that lead to a 30-year spike in measles and outbreaks across the country. But also, two, in that same interview, Ari, he went on to say that we're going to start conducting real science. And I'm thoroughly confused about what he means by that, especially when this administration has been cutting research dollars to universities, public health institutions, including the NIH. And Robert Kennedy Jr. has been slashing staff. So I'm thoroughly confused about what positive impact he hopes to make or endeavors to make, with that being the reality we're facing. When something like measles, which was eradicated 25 years ago, is surging again in this moment. It just presents the reality that with him in that role, with this Trump administration, the public is less safe in terms of our health and well being.
Yeah, and it's happening now. These are not, hypotheticals. I want to turn to the other big thing that if someone would have told you a month ago, not only were Trump and Musk going to have a fallout, but Musk was going to potentially plow his considerable fortune into complicating the life of Donald Trump and the Republicans. This is something if it happens. So, Mark, Juanita, I want to ask you about the other big news driving this week. Elon Musk says he's really going to fund a third party against the GOP. We're going to get into that in 90 seconds. Elon Musk going after Trump and the Republicans in a way that could really matter beyond just tweeting or talking. He is vowing to now begin a new political party that would compete with the Republican Party. He says he'll call it the America Party. This Musk announcement comes amidst the break with Trump over the Republican budget, slashing subsidies, including things that Musk wanted that benefit his companies. Trump lashing out further. So the feud that had died down is back this week, saying Musk is off the rails and a train wreck.
I think it's ridiculous to start a third party. Third parties have never worked. So he can have fun with it, but I think it's ridiculous.
I'm back with Mark and Juanita. And Mark, we live in the world as it is and not as it might be. We were just discussing the power of some of these corporations that want to help Trump. Here is someone who has a level of wealth that can dwarf most congressional races. Can meaningfully be involved in the presidential race, as he showed last time. Trump says third parties don't work. Political scientists would tell you third parties have often tipped elections, even at the national level. Do you think if he spends on it, that this thing could matter or complicate the GOP's life?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that seems to be what Elon Musk's ideal reality would be here, which is to sort of disrupt what Republicans think, what they need to sort of win and continue to win the House majority and to keep the Senate. But I also think, a lot of the details here are key. I mean, Elon Musk has shown consistently that he's not really much of a detail guy as far as seeing something like this through. I mean, this is going to be requiring a lot of infrastructure, someone to recruit, candidates, getting people on the ballot, and so forth. I mean, that's a lot of sort of nitty gritty work, which obviously he didn't seem to be too big of a fan of before. So we'll see. I mean, I see why Trump would be ambivalent about it, because I mean, he probably stands to lose more. But I also think that, I have some serious doubts about Elon Musk's ability to actually execute something like this, given his relatively brief and somewhat tumultuous record in politics.
Yeah, I mean, he's a complex figure in that way, Juanita. You can't doubt that he's had impact. He's had huge impacts in fields that he's focused on. But unlike other people that sometimes put decades into something, he has this frenetic, almost ADD style of management. As a Politico yourself, I'm sure you can remind everyone, Juanita, how long-term party building usually takes multiple cycles. That's even if the Democrats are down a little bit and they're trying to fight back in Virginia or North Carolina. And that's a party people are registered in. Here, you're asking for a whole new thing.
Not only are you asking for a whole new thing, it goes down to a granular level of hoops that he would have to jump through at the state and local levels in terms of petitions signed by local voters, engagement that's sustained. Candidates would be willing to run under his banner even, and then you bring in the entire concept of the federal election commissions and legal responsibilities and requirements and filings. I don't think he has the stomach for the long game, as Mark mentioned. But also, Ari, I got to jump back to something we talked about last time I was on with Jason Johnson, when he's like, why is a billionaire able to even influence elections this way? It does hearken to the devastating state of our democracy at present, and how much farther it stands to decline if someone like Elon Musk continues to throw around his wealth and his billions in this game, when the reality is that real people's lives and well-being are on the line with every single election.
Yeah, Mark, how about that? I mean, we live our lives mostly through stories, not statistics. If the story becomes enough billionaires that are overreaching and upsetting to enough people, does that catalyze some concern that Juanita mentions? That heck of a lot of people, left, right, and center, don't think other people, whether they made a lot of money or moved here from wherever, should be running everything just because they're rich.
You would think. I mean, I do think, look, I mean, it's unclear how much money, if any, Elon Musk is going to put into this. I mean, right now, his big interest, or at least his big success, has been to trigger Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump obviously doesn't like that he's doing this. And I think Elon Musk probably, is getting a kick out of that fact alone. Look, I think people don't like rich, billionaires getting involved in politics, but it's never stopped them before. It certainly didn't stop them in the last election. And there's really not been an election where you can point to money in politics sort of being the main issue. I mean, yes, John McCain has, that was sort of his signature when he first started running, his fundraising reform bill, which was a huge issue, but it hasn't really gotten traction, certainly not since, the Supreme Court ruled, in favor of just super PACs and the unlimited money being allowed to be spent on campaigns. So, look, right now, I mean, I think it's sort of a distraction, and it's also hard to imagine a serious politician running in congressional district X on the America Party because he or she is very, very compelled by Elon Musk's vision for the future. I mean, I don't see it, but I guess it could happen in the next year and a half sometime.
Yeah, and he is different than most of these billionaires who are pulling levers. He has a actual large following. I mean, he's fashions himself a type of tech celebrity, and he owns these platforms where they talk about paid media. He's paid a lot to make himself, allegedly popular, whether he is or not. The social media of this is something we just saw in New York. Social media, in many ways, can have a huge impact. So he's a little different that way. We'll have to watch it. Mark and Juanita, thanks to both of you for being here.
Thanks, Ari.
Thanks, Art.
Appreciate it. Ta-Nehisi Coates is here tonight as we look at democracy in the Trump era. Big thinker. Also, the backlash to Trump's bill now becoming law, the budget over the July 4th weekend that will slash so much health care. We're seeing the uprisings, and markets jittery as Trump's bumped deadlines for the trade war come back to haunt him. President Trump has not reached the many trade deals he vowed starting from the start of this tariff and trade war. He backed down partially and also did some delays to buy himself time. But if you ever thought maybe over the holiday or as the summer's been going on, whatever happened to that trade war? Well, what Donald Trump started is coming due again. The Dow Jones crashing about 400 points today because there is concern that this trade war ain't over, it's just delayed. Not only that, but Trump's talking up other tariffs on 10 other countries between 25 to 40%. They have delayed the date that the tariffs would have taken effect to next month. But again, as soon as this is back on people's minds and the markets think any of this has a risk of being real, they start pricing in the risk. Remember, Wednesday was actually supposed to be the real delayed deadline. Trump's team had one time talked up 90 deals in 90 days. They are under 5 deals, and we don't hear anything about a full 90 anymore. Now, as for the delaying, this isn't the first time. Donald Trump has relented and backed off the tariffs so many times that Wall Street traders, who often lean Republican, refer to him as a chicken. They have an acronym TACO, as in Trump always chickens out. It is a bit of wordplay that got so much airplay that Trump himself has responded to it. Now, the threats, though, are still rattling the markets because even if you think there's a unlikely chance this will happen, say 90% Trump will delay and back down again, but 10% chance that this thing could finally escalate into another round of trade war, well, then you're supposed to price that 10%. Now, 5 polls show most people don't approve of Trump's budget. People have heard bad things from how it's going to affect inflation in the economy to healthcare. Backlash has been visible out in the country for those who don't follow maybe every internet news story or national cable political news. Here's how it's playing locally and online.
Food pantries are reeling as the mega bill passes through the House.
Analysts predict that the big but ugly bill is going to add $2.4 trillion to the national deficit.
Crowds of people holding signs, chanting, and marching.
This bill basically sets a trap.
It's sending billions and billions of dollars to a force that is picking people up off the street without warrants.
You're doing everything you're supposed to do, you're working, but you can't afford to be healthy.
Take away from both like food stamps and healthcare, Medicare, all those things, and then give to like massive tax cuts to billionaires.
The word is getting out. We are joined by Jared Bernstein, veteran of the White House under Obama Biden, chaired the Council of Economic Advisors under President Biden. Welcome. You see some of the awareness of the budget and the sort of low-grade trade war, which went to the back burner for a bit. How is this affecting the economy? And what do you think of that risk I mentioned, that people have seen this cycle, so maybe they think it'll all get worked out on the tariffs, but meantime, there seems to be some cost.
If people, and in this case, investors in the markets, think that things are going to work out, then the markets don't fall by 400 points on the Dow, about a percent, just under 1% for the Dow, the S&P, the Nasdaq, all three indices, and you don't see the kind of nervousness that we've seen among American businesses who are sitting on their hands when it comes to investing because they don't know where this is going to bounce. I wrote a piece this morning, Ari, that was called "There Are But Two Roads Out of Tariff Hell." One path is Trump declares victory, which he could do, and the MAGA crowd would probably applaud, and certainly businesses, consumers would like it. The other path, probably more likely, is to set the damn rates and move on. He is taking neither road, and that kind of uncertainty is clearly hurting markets, businesses, consumers, the overall economy.
Yeah. Here's what they're saying about the healthcare stuff, which now is going to hit so many people, whether they were following it closely in the summer or not. I've got this congressman on the Republican side, and then Jeffries trying to address it. Take a look.
You're not worried at all that Americans may lose their health care?
Oh, well, just some Americans that aren't Americans, and that is the illegals. Why should illegals be on Medicare?
Actually, federal law, to your point, Anna, explicitly prohibits federal dollars from being used to provide health care to undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
And so that was always a lie.
What do you see from an economic perspective on the budget, the healthcare impact, and how long it's going to take before people start feeling this?
Well, before I get into the economics, I think what we saw there is that a bunch of people who voted for this bill really don't know what was in it. I mean, I've seen that many times over, and that's just a really horrible situation. In terms of the economics, there are so many things to worry about. First of all, we know that one of the things that's really troubling Americans is the cost of living. And in that sense, this bill deeply betrays the working class who put this administration, many of whom put this administration in the White House because they believed them when they said we're going to lower costs, we're going to lower interest rates, we're going to make housing, healthcare, education, groceries less expensive. They've actually, let's tie these two conversations we're having together. What do tariffs do? They make life more expensive, particularly for middle and working class people. What happens when you cut medical coverage, nutritional support, energy support? The price of electricity will go up because of this bill, higher education. These are all betrayals of people who need help with their living standards. They're getting kicked in the head by this bill. And I can wax all day about the economics of deficit financing and the interest rate implications. I actually think that's very important. Bottom line, this is a betrayal of working people.
Yeah. Speaker Johnson was talking about it this weekend, including the voters' response. Take a look.
We're excited about the upcoming election cycle in 26 because people will be riding an economic high, just as we did after the first 2 years of the first Trump administration. But this time it's on steroids.
Now, on the one hand, I don't know what else he's going to say, but I am putting it to you. Do you think the bill, properly understood as it gets out there as law, is going to help them?
No, I don't. And for the very reasons I was just saying. I mean, one of the first thing that starts happening in this bill is that the government is going to have to sell more bonds in order to raise money to cover the deficit that they are exacerbating with this bill. My belief, and that of pretty much any economist who've looked at it, is that this puts upward pressure on interest rates, and that feeds right into mortgage rates. The tariffs, as we've mentioned, they're going to raise prices, and once some of the healthcare cuts are backdated, but some of them begin, particularly the ones that hurt some of the hospitals, they start to come in pretty quickly. And the backdrop of this is also something we shouldn't lose sight of. Consumer spending has actually been flat since Trump took office. It's just been about zero in real terms. We've seen some cracks in the labor market. It's still solid, no question, but the hiring rate is way down, and companies again are sitting on their hands when it comes to investing, when it comes to hiring, to see where a lot of this lands. So is the Federal Reserve, by the way. They're solidly in wait and see mode. And what we saw today does nothing for them because it just increases the uncertainty. So that means they're going to be hesitant to lower interest rates to try to help boost growth going forward. So, again, I think, as you said, Speaker Johnson's going to say what he has to say, but I think it's going to be proved wrong.
Understood. Jared Bernstein, coming out of the holiday, all systems firing on your analysis. So we appreciate you on more than one topic. Thank you, sir. Coming up tonight, we do have Ta-Nehisi Coates here. It's always interesting, the author on the state of race and history in Trump's America. We're going to hear from him on that tonight. But next, we do head to Central Texas for an update on a community absolutely reeling from really this catastrophic flooding, these terrible death tolls. We will keep you updated on all of that next. We turn to the devastating, deadly floods in Central Texas, which hit over this holiday weekend. There were heavy rains on Friday, which caused a river to surge about 30 feet in under an hour. You can just see how quickly that overtook everything there. Officials have now confirmed over 100 people killed. That includes 27 girls and camp counselors who attended a summer camp that was positioned just along that river. Dozens are missing. Search and rescue efforts are now entering a fourth day. More rainfall, unfortunately, is expected overnight. Survivors of the catastrophic flooding have been sharing what they witnessed, what they experienced, and the heartbreak as these tragic events unfolded.
This one was a true, very fast, ferocious, like no one had seen probably since 32 flood.
What kind of things have you seen out here? Unthinkable things. I mean, there's things that no one ever would have thought they've seen in their lifetime.
We had no warning. Nobody notified us.
And there was a crepe myrtle tree that we grabbed hold of, and we waited for rescue.
Hundreds of miles of devastation. So we need help. They keep finding more missing people down the river.
I'm just trying to do whatever I can.
People trying to get by. Some members of the community have been gathering, providing food, supplies, whatever they can offer up to those affected. President Trump signed a disaster declaration for that county, Kerr County, Texas. A flood watch, we should note, remains in place until 7 p.m. Central Time for our viewers in that region. This has been a very tough time for everyone out there. Our thoughts and prayers are with everyone, and we will keep reporting on this here on MSNBC as we get additional information tonight and in the days ahead. We wanted to keep you updated on that. I'm going to fit in a break. When we returned, as promised, we're joined by the author Ta-Nehisi Coates as we consider what democracy means today. People are coming back to work after July 4th, a time to look at what unites us in this country, or even reflect on history and sacrifice beyond our current political divides. That's at least the hope. Of course, today we see a week starting with plenty of politics and clashes. Even history isn't safe from our current partisan brawls. Republican lawmakers and many MAGA pundits often twist history and the very definition of civil rights concepts, say being a victim of discrimination. Remember, elite schools and institutions have long discriminated against women and racial minorities and in favor of classes and graduates like you see here, mostly men, mostly white men. But some MAGA voices now insist the actual victims are the white men, a wider trend that author Ta-Nehisi Coates has documented in his books and journalism. We turn to that now.
I don't think there should be a Black History Month.
That particular passage wasn't saying that slavery was a benefit. They was saying there was resourcefulness and people acquired skills in spite of slavery.
The word racism is almost extinct now because we can't discern true racism from wokeness. Wokeness is racism in and of itself. It's all activism. It's all ideology. It's no history.
We cannot perpetuate a lie to our students and push this propaganda leftist agenda, teaching our kids to hate America.
The only through line that you might get across the spectrum from left, right, middle there is that racism is bad. You don't have a lot of people who say out loud the opposite. But now they've tried to hijack that and say that the problem is that type of racism, or what they call wokeness run amok, and it's against these white men. What do you see there, and why do you think that is happening, particularly rhetorically, that they want to take the terms that may have at one point done something?
I think that's not as new as it looks.
Okay.
If you had went to a slaveholder in Virginia in 1840 and said, why can't we, free these people? I mean, there would have been a long list of reasons, but among those reasons would have been, if I free them, they'll kill me, In 1865, after Black folks were freed, if you had went to them and said, why do you need to be in charge? They would say, because these people are going to oppress us. And then if you had come in 1876 after reparations, they would have said, because these people are oppressing us. The notion of the person doing the violence, because people rarely say, you know what I mean? I want your money, give it to me. I could put it to better use. You know what I mean? Like evil rarely confesses itself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And so the notion that white people have somehow been victimized, you know what I mean, by some other, group of people, very often Black people, is not a particularly modern invention. Those who are interested in white power and the maintenance of white power always use victimhood.
Yeah.
As a construction. And what they don't do is they don't substantiate. Look, I don't stand up and tell you that, Black folks have, been an oppressed class in this country. I point to statistics, I point to history, I tell you things that have happened at particular points. I don't, merely just marshal rhetoric.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think those that oppose that point of view have a much more difficult time doing that.
There's those statistics, while we're also in a period of resurgent activism against Trump. And on behalf of people targeted because of their immigration status, race, or even beliefs, as we've seen on the college visa crackdowns, which also raises some deeper questions right now. The question, you wrote, is not whether Lincoln truly meant government of the people, but what our country has throughout its history taken the political term people to actually mean. And legally, it's easy for folks to forget that.
That's not bad.
Not bad. You like that? Put it back up, as they say. Run it back. Because I'll let people take another moment, let it sink in, because law is written in language. So if the language says person, but person doesn't include humans, or also includes corporations, then suddenly the words get pretty confusing and subject to power. So given that, tell us your thoughts today.
I mean, I remember what I was trying to get across with that. And it was true at the time. Black folks at that particular point in time, to a large extent women, and all sorts of other groups were basically written outside of what, the bounds of what, people thought democracy, or who the people thought democracy was fit for. And I think that has remained true. There is no lack of democratic language among Trump and his followers. They just don't think certain people should matter. And that's just the basic idea. There's a tolerance for a cruelty. There's a tolerance for a kind of violence. There's a tolerance for a kind of hierarchy and anti-democratic norms, as long as it's not those who they consider to be the people, And so I don't, folks have no problem preaching democracy as long as it's democracy for certain people.
Coates discussing his memoir there, Between the World and Me, to mark its 10th anniversary. These are new excerpts from our extended interview, and if you want to see the entire full interview, it's on YouTube. You can search Coates and Melber or go to msnbc.com/Ari for our YouTube playlist. We'll be right back. Developments in artificial intelligence are looming over many aspects of our lives, from business to workplace to democracy itself. The New York Times' Ezra Klein was talking to us about that in one of our extended interviews, and here's what he said.
One of many things I worry about with AI is it automates away from us the exact parts of intellectual work that make us smarter. In every generation, you got to make sure the solutions of the past era don't become the problems of the current era. Efficiency towards a better America is something I would support. Efficiency to run the country off a cliff, I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah. A final thought there from one of our guests. As I mentioned, you can go to msnbc.com/Ari, A-R-I, see our playlist and catch up on those longer interviews, some of them extended, especially for our digital viewers. Thanks for watching.